Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Contrary to what's in the program book, this is not Peter Grunwald. As you can see, it says Richard Gill. He's going to talk about statistics and the law, mathematics and the law. The both of them have been involved in a rather rather well-known, and I can't say famous, more like an infamous case in the Netherlands, whereby a nurse was being sued for killing of people on the basis of statistics. And he's one of the people who helped to sort of undo the work of the previous courts, so that the case is by now finally being under review again, for which she at least is very grateful, and I think quite a number of other people. Prepare yourself for statistics and the law. Enjoy.
Okay. Yep, thank you very much. So, indeed, I'm Richard Gill and not Peter Grunwald. Peter Grunwald is a good friend of mine, and we did a lot of work together on this case. And does this work? Doesn't work. Well, he couldn't be here, so I flew in for him. These are some logos of some of my sponsors, which I won't say too much about. If there's one thing I'd like you to remember is, you may have heard a saying, lies, damned lies, and something or other. Forget it. Spread this one around. I'd like everybody to, when they hear about lies and damned lies, to think about legal truth. Actually, so this is I want to tell you about an infamous case in the Netherlands, which, as you have seen, is a wonderful, progressive, kind, friendly, sunny, lovely country, but it has some strange streaks in it. And one of the strange things is that even in the most modern society, in modern Europe, one can have an old-fashioned witch hunt and a witch trial, and like everything happened short of burning her on a fire. But it's what they would have done 200 years ago. Actually, I don't want to talk too much about the mathematics or the statistics, so if there are people who are here especially to hear lots of math and statistics, I'm sorry, I'm going to disappoint you, because I was thinking what is really interesting about this case, I think, perhaps for a community of hackers or whatever, who I think of as being somewhat like a community of scientists, is actually like what happened in this case was at some point, let me show you an alternative title, if I can find the right button, maybe this one. This is another title I often give to my talk, Science versus Justice, and it's a strange thing that both science and justice are both looking after are searching for the truth. You're trying to find out what is the truth, or describe the truth, or get as close as possible to the truth. Scientists do that, and justice tries to do that too. That's what our justice system is all about. But actually one sees in this case two communities pitted against one another at some point. Scientific community, which I think of as being like the hackers community, where you value creativity and freedom and thinking out things for yourself and individual responsibility. And on the other hand, you have, well, the justice establishment, which is a community, a very big and powerful community in modern societies, which lives by rules. They are bureaucrats. They do not think creatively. Well, sometimes they do think creatively. You'll see in my story that we, the scientists, actually forced them, the lawyers, to be very creative, because they kind of trapped themselves in their own laws. This woman was thrown into jail, and there was absolutely no way she could be taken out of jail again, according to the law, even if everybody could see she was innocent. So actually the lawyers had to do some creative thinking to figure out a way to still follow their rules and let her out. I'll explain that. Well, I think there's another little preliminary thing I just wanted to mention. Somebody emailed me this quote 2 days ago. I thought it's a nice way to represent, indeed, a bureaucratic system, a big establishment, a big, them. The system. Systems evolve in order to stay existing for a long, long time. And they do that by forming rules, and then everybody inside the system acts by the rules, and then everything is okay. And the systems see themselves as being perfect. the Dutch legal system sees itself as perhaps the most perfect legal system on earth. Perhaps it is. It's not that bad, actually. But it thinks of itself as being perfect. And actually, I don't know how many Dutch people are here, but they probably will also would typically feel that they must have the best legal system in the world. And it must be perfect, because this is such a wonderful country, and we organize things here so beautifully. So if your system is perfect, then mistakes cannot happen. So you don't have to take account of them. So you don't ever have any mistakes, because you don't recognize them, because they don't exist. So you can never learn from your mistakes, and so you stay stuck. And system evolves into a dead end, like dinosaurs or something like that. It becomes blind to its environment because it knows so well about itself that it's perfect and infallible. And it's written in the law that the final word of the final Dutch judges is the legal, ultimate, final truth from the legal point of view. And the legal point of view is the point of view which has the power of the state behind it. Okay, let's see what happens next. So there are 2 points of view to this story, and if I would be telling this story 5 years ago or 6 years ago, it would be very controversial, and most people would actually think of this point of view. This is a journalist's, newspaper artist's drawing of this woman, this nurse, in court. She's looking rather haggard and a bit witch-like. We never saw a picture of her. We never knew her surname. We only knew her first name, Lucia de B, actually Berg. We heard a lot of strange stories about her in the newspaper. For instance, she'd been a prostitute. That was a very, very shocking thing in this modern liberal country, that a nurse should formerly have been a prostitute was definitely not a good thing. This is what she looked like when I visited her a month or two ago. There's not a very good picture. It's taken with my iPhone. Recently, watching Kill Bill 2, I think she looks very much like Uma Thurman. And actually, she is a very, very tough woman, a very gorgeous woman in the way that Uma Thurman is a gorgeous woman, but a powerful woman. Very powerful woman. And powerful women are threats to men, of course, and this is why witches have always been burnt. Well, some people will still think that she's a wicked witch who killed loads of babies and old people about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And nowadays, most people think that she is a kind of a victim of bad luck and a not perfect system. I have some more pictures here at the beginning. Some people involved in this case. People said to me at the beginning, I only got involved in this about 2 or 3 years ago, and it all started about 8 years ago. So I'm a latecomer to this game. Peter Grunwald was before me, and he actually was the one who pulled me in 2 or 3 years ago. At that time, when the total Dutch opinion, also of educated, reasonable, intelligent, even hackers, nice people, and intelligent people, was the woman must have been a witch. Of course, legal systems aren't perfect. Perhaps they hadn't actually proved that she'd actually killed 10 people, but perhaps they'd only proved that she'd killed 5, but probably she'd killed 20 or 30 anyway, so who cares? And it was finished. It was all finished and done with and forgotten. And some people said to me, how can you stand up and say that you know better than 17 judges? Because her case went from a lower court to a higher court to the Supreme Court, altogether 17 independent, wise, intelligent judges have thought deeply about her case. I have to tell you, in the Netherlands, we do not have juries. This would be terrible. Imagine men in the street deciding who goes to jail and so on. No, we have a board of wise magistrates who are, of course, totally independent and extremely wise and knowledgeable. Of course, they're all lawyers and they've all been to law school, and actually they all come from the same small segment of society, so they're not actually that independent, I think. But the 17 judges have been through her papers, and all of them have confirmed that she's a murderer, a terrible murderer. And coincidentally, nearly all of them have names like this: Fokkens, Fokkemer, Fokking. You might, if you're a non-Dutch person, kind of recognize what this word might be related to in English. And this is very strange. Anyway, there are many strange coincidences in this. In fact, it's all about chance and coincidence, because I think it was just bad luck this lady had. It was an unlikely coincidence. How unlikely, I will say something about later. These are some people involved in the case from the early days. This is a philosopher of science called Tom Derksen, and this is his sister called Meta de Noo. And in the early days, these were the two single people, together with maybe one rather alternative journalist and maybe just one or two other people, who were convinced that something was wrong in this case and started getting involved in it and finding more and more out about it. Now, the reason this person and this person got involved was actually family, because here's these two persons' brother, a guy called Wim Derksen, who's actually a fairly well-known Socialist Party politician, which is also interesting, and he is the husband of somebody I have never seen a picture of. This is a movie, The Unknown Woman. Anyway, Wim Derksen here is the husband of a lady called, I almost hesitate to say her name because I'd probably be arrested for libel if I mention her name in this context. A woman called Arda Derksen, who was the chief pediatrician, so the head doctor, the chef de clinique at a hospital in The Hague back in 2001 when everything started. So this unknown lady, Arda Derksen, has got something very much to do with our story, and it was like at family parties and at the kitchen table and so on that this brother-in-law of this lady and this sister-in-law of this lady heard all kinds of gossip and stories about the case as it evolved and started to get uncomfortable feelings. I think that's the end of those pictures. So now, I have no idea what the time is. I've switched off my iPhone. Anybody know what the time is? Does it say so? Oh, it says there in big red letters. Okay. Yep. Please ask me questions anytime you want. I don't know if I go too fast or too slow. There are so many things can be said in this case, so many morals and stories which can be told. Anyway, here's a quick overview of what are certainly facts. In 2001, at the Juliana Children's Hospital in The Hague, The Hague is a large village, perhaps you know, but it's also the seat of the Dutch government and the seat of international war crimes tribunals, and considers itself the international capital of law. At a children's hospital in that city, actually village I should say, sorry, on the 4th of September, that's a week before the 11th of September, which was my 50th birthday, which I thought was rather mean, but a baby died overnight, sort of unexpectedly. In the newspapers which started reporting on these events in the weeks and months later, one got the idea that this was a children's hospital and you could imagine your little cousin or your little daughter or whatever being in hospital with a broken arm or something like that, and horrible things being done to them by a wicked angel of death. Actually, this hospital specialized somewhat as a specialist children's hospital in very young children with birth defects. And this little baby, Amber, was not an exception. Specialists have later said to me, the miracle about baby Amber, who died when she was about 6 months old, I think, was not that she died then, but that she had stayed alive so long. They had recently fixed her heart. And at least that was something they had sort of patched up. And they'd also told the parents that she would be able to go home in a few days, probably. Perhaps it was not a wise thing to have said, but they had said that. There were still terrible things wrong with it, and it had been in and out of hospital ever since it had been born. And in Holland we say dat vogeltjes voor de poes. I don't know how to well, that little bird is for the cat. You can, I suppose, imagine what I mean. Well, that death was recorded as a natural death. It was an unexpected event, but the child seemed to be recovering okay from its last operation, but actually the nurses close to the child knew that in the last few days it had been getting worse in some respects. All kinds of things becoming more difficult for this little thing. And so actually nobody was terribly surprised, though of course the doctors handling the case were well, embarrassed, I could say. On the next day, a nurse of the ward on which baby Amber was went to the chief pediatrician, who was our unknown woman I have just shown you, with a bad feeling, because Lucia had been on duty that last night. And that other nurse had the feeling that Lucia had been on duty several times when recently children had actually died or nearly died on the ward, which at that moment, at that time, seemed to be a kind of unusual thing. There had been, from 2 years before till 1 year before, no child had died on that ward, and in the last year there had been like half a dozen deaths. And every time Lucia, well, heroine, main person, or villain, whichever you like, she had been on duty every time. And Lucia, as I mentioned, was a strong and powerful and remarkable woman who definitely inspired sort of love and adoration among some of her colleagues, and jealousy and hate and discomfort among others. And she was certainly one who stood out in the crowd, which is not a good thing to do in Holland, where we like to have everything very neat and cut off at the maaiveld, as they say, like a grass, beautiful manicured lawn. No heads should stick up, otherwise. Lucia was about 10 years older than most of her colleague nurses. She already had a daughter of her own. She had had a very disturbed or troubled childhood in a very dysfunctional family, and mother, maybe her father too, had been alcoholics, and all kinds of things were pretty bad. And indeed, she had even been had a lover boyfriend in her teens for a couple of years in Vancouver, Canada. And so she had been, in some sense, a prostitute for a year or two, 10 or 15 years earlier. This was known, and there was gossip about her. Well, our chief pediatrician definitely decided to check up on this coincidence business and did some statistics with an Excel spreadsheet, and nobody has ever seen them. Nobody knows what she did or how she did it. But she came up with a chance of 1 in 7 billion or something, or 7 million, I can't remember. But actually nobody knows what. And decided it was not a coincidence. It could not be a coincidence that Lucia had been present every single time in the last year when a child had died on the ward. And that was about half a dozen occasions. Lucia was a full-time nurse, so she was. There are 3 shifts in a day. You do 1 of 3 shifts, but of course you don't have weekends like ordinary people, but you work for a number of days, and then you have some days off. So she worked maybe 1 in 6 of the shifts during that year, and she had somehow caught all the events in her shifts. Definitely not a coincidence, according to Excel. And this decided things. This is like a little crystal turning something from solution into crystals. Suddenly everything, there was a phase change, and immediately the death, which had already been recorded as natural death, was cancelled, and it was an unnatural death. There was a second post-mortem immediately. And in the next days, a whole collection of incidents and deaths at this hospital and at another hospital where Lucia had been working was put together and all attributed to Lucia. So in 2 weeks, around the 11th of September, they had a list of 30 murders and attempted murders where Lucia had been there every time when unusual and bad things had happened. And the gossip grew and grew. And though I suppose an unnatural death gets reported to a police, there was not a police investigation yet. The actual police investigation starts officially about here, and already on that same day, the director of the hospital gave a press conference saying, well, he realized that people had heard that there were some unfortunate occurrences been going on at his hospital, and he certainly he was rather worried and embarrassed by it all, but they were doing everything in their power to restore the confidence of the people in his hospital, and a certain nurse had been put on non-active. So at this moment, you have the director of a big hospital in a big city on TV telling journalists, we have caught a serial killer. There's no going back now. There's no going back now. From that point, or around that time, top down in the hospital, the conviction grew, extended slowly to almost everyone that there had been a serial killer at work. It took a while to sort of reach the work floor again, because many of Lucia's colleagues couldn't say a bad thing about her. I should mention there are two kinds of nurses. If you're ever in a hospital, 4 and 5 of them sort of do their work from 9 to 5, and they're a bit busy, and they might smile at you occasionally, but probably not very often. And 1 in 5 of them are actually passionate about, helping people get better. And actually, these are the nurses which actually help people to get better. But Lucia was one of this latter kind. But when events like this happen, the guilt is always pointed at these kind of nurses, right? Because they get so involved with their patients. This is also suspicious. This is also the fear of women having power over life and death and things. We don't like that, apparently. Well, okay, so things go very fast in the Netherlands. Our legal system judicial system is extremely efficient. It's probably one of the cheapest ones in the world. I think this is probably one of the reasons why the Dutch like it so much. Lucia pleaded innocent, but she got a life sentence for 4 murders and 2 attempted murders at that children's hospital, at another hospital where she'd worked before, and another hospital where she'd worked before. And basically there was no proof of anything. There was no poison found. No, there was no poison found. There was these 4 deaths and 2 resuscitations seemed to have nothing in common. That was actually what they had in common, was that they had nothing in common. There's an important point later. If Lucia was a murderer, she was an extremely clever murderer who managed to remove all possible traces of what she had done. No poison, the children or the old people weren't suffocated. Nothing, absolutely nothing. What was important was statistics. A statistician popped up and said 1 in 342 million in court. 1 in 342 million, this coincidence is impossible.
Sorry, but it was not entirely true. There was some evidence that there was a high level of some medical medication.
Yes, you are thinking of at the next level, at the higher court. Yeah. At this level, there was none.
At that level, there was none?
No. Okay. No. There was, at this level, one of the things there was a guy in the detention center who had said that he had heard Lucia saying that she had helped these people to their end. Later, he admitted he'd just said this to, be important or something. There was no medical proof at this level at all. And she only got 4 murders and 2 attempts. She got life for it. the statistics was kind of the only hard thing. And I know from having spoken to journalists who were in the room, the courtroom, when the statistician said 1 in 300, 1 op 340 miljoen, there was a stunned silence. People had sort of, it looked kind of extreme, as you'll see in a moment, but okay. But when you say 1 in 342 million, this kind of sealed Lucia's fate at that point. Certainly it turned the opinions of a number of intelligent, educated journalists, for instance, who from that point onwards were convinced that Lucia was a killer. Actually, there was also an argument which also impressed people who were sitting in the court at the time, and that was that Lucia was a liar. The judges were very clever at sort of provoking her to say things which later she had to retract. Well, they were clever at showing she was a liar, however you like it. Some people who were sitting there thought it was an incredible, what's the word? I mean, travesty, right? I mean, a doctor is allowed to forget what he did on one day and say something different on one occasion or another occasion. Okay, he just forgot. But if Lucia says one thing one day and then later hears a doctor say, yes, but it wasn't this day, it was the other day, then she says, oh, well, I suppose you must be right. But now she's a liar, because the first time she said something which has been contradicted. And a number of journalists were very impressed how clever the judges were to, in a little bit mean way, but they really established that she was a devious liar. Other people sitting in the courtroom thought it was appalling and a travesty. We never saw her, or pictures of her. The nearest was we saw a photograph of her feet in the courtroom, and you could see she was wearing rather pretty white sandals, and her toenails were painted pink. I don't think this was wise of her. But, and of course it was very unwise to plead innocent. You don't do that in Holland. People never used to do that. Sorry? Yeah, of course. I mean, they did lots and lots of autopsies. They found nothing. Nothing. Well, in a moment I'll tell you they did find something, perhaps. But they did not find anything. They could not find any, there was no link to any particular poison or anything. Both the defense and the prosecution appealed. In the Netherlands, the prosecution is also allowed to appeal because, of course, they had actually wanted to have her put away for 10 murders or 14 or something. And this 4 plus 2 is not enough. Well, she got a life sentence anyway. In the Netherlands, you can't have multiple life sentences. Life is just life. It's not like in the US where you can go to jail for 1,000 years. Sorry? Yes. Okay. Right. Yes. Now, so there was an appeal, and that time, actually, it appeared that medical proof had been found. Medical proof was found that the baby Amber had died of poison called digoxin, which seemed to have been found in some organs of that baby, like the 4th or 5th time that they looked. They believed that she had had an opportunity because there was a window of time when she was apparently with the child, but nobody else was, so she could have. They also found a motive for her. It was a bit of a strange motive. The motive was that she had a compulsion, because one of the unwise things this lady did was keep a diary. So never do that. Don't keep a diary. But she wrote very weird things in her diary, which anybody would be very embarrassed to hear about. And one of the things she wrote in her diary was that she had given away yet again to her compulsion once. And that was actually on the same day that an old lady had died in the previous hospital where she'd been working. Another coincidence. And Lucia claimed that her compulsion was a compulsion to read tarot cards to patients, elderly men or women facing death. She felt it was unprofessional. Many people thought this a totally implausible, crazy story, and the judges in particular, and they decided that her compulsion was a compulsion to murder. So she had a motive, namely a compulsion to murder. She had an opportunity, and Amber had apparently died of poison. Moreover, we now know that Lucia is a murderer. We know she's a murderer. We also know she's a liar because she has denied it. So now we know she is a liar. It's now proven. This means that from now on, whatever she says, it doesn't actually mean it's all not true. The things which you don't want are not true. The things which you do want are true. You can choose. And that is how legal arguments work. And there was something called a chain argument, which is like this. If 10 prostitutes have been murdered in the streets of Vierhouten, and one person, we've proven that one person actually killed one of those prostitutes, and if that person was coincidentally in the neighborhood each of the other 9 times, and they all died in the same way, and that person had got no reason to being there those 9 times, then it seems kind of reasonable to convict that person for those other 9 murders as well. And they did this in a kind of more gradual way. For the next case, there was slightly less evidence was needed. I mean, you could say that you could legally prove that Lucia was the murderer of this child and that it had been murdered on the basis of less evidence than would have been needed if the case had stood alone. And then the next one, even less. And the next one, even less. All you need is that she's there every time, that she's got no reason for being there every time, and that the deaths are all very similar. Their similarity was actually that they were all very different. That's a strange thing, but... Okay, right, we race on. Okay, so, yes, it was very important. There had been enormous controversy about statistics in the newspaper. And all kinds of people saying this 1 in 342 million was nonsense, and it indeed was, for a number of reasons. And the judges were very careful not to use statistics in their conviction in the second time. Very careful not to. They wrote on the first page, we do not use a statistical probability calculation on the first page of 100, the longest summing up ever. And they gave her life, and when she came out of jail after life, she should be shut up in a psychiatric detention where she could possibly be cured for 7 murders and 3 attempts. There's something strange about this. I move forward rapidly. The Supreme Court went to the Supreme Court. Lucia again appealed. By now, some laboratory evidence had been found which disputed the existence of this poison. There wasn't any, according to the state-of-the-art Strasbourg laboratory, where they sent some of these organs, and they didn't find any. But the clever judges of the Supreme Court did point out that you cannot send somebody for psychiatric detention in a hospital after they've come out of their sentence. Firstly, because it's a life sentence, so they're not going to come out. So that was very clever to notice that. Secondly, she had pleaded not guilty, so there was nothing she could be treated for. And though some psychiatrists had observed some disorders, as they would observe in any of us, there was no disorder found which seemed to have any relevance to the case. So there was nothing to treat her for. So therefore, she should not have this detention in psychiatric ward after her life sentence. So they removed that. Lucia had a stroke at this stage and is somewhat paralyzed on one side. Okay, now the story gets faster now, please don't worry. Meanwhile, the Mette de Noo, who's actually, this is the sister-in-law of the chief pediatrician, was getting very uneasy. She is also a doctor. And incidentally, her sister-in-law was actually getting highly depressed and went into a psychiatric hospital for a very severe depression. Before that, she appeared to be somewhat paranoid. There were a lot of strange things going on, they say. But anyway, this doctor got very uneasy about how that whole thing had gone and started digging out information. And at some point, she got her brother, the philosopher, involved, and he got involved in it in a big way, and he wrote this book. He's a philosopher of science, and he analyzed the arguments of the court, which are 100 pages long, and he sort of exploded them at every single page, every point in a fat book. Some people find it a bit dull reading. but I think it's rather good. And this family was now split, and the two parts of the family have never spoken to each other since about then. Peter Grunwald read that book, and he made me read it, and that was when I got involved. This philosopher submitted on the basis of the research he'd done for this book, he submitted an application to a committee which had been set up for political reasons, really, because we had had several real miscarriages of justice, in which it was known that they were miscarriages of justice because it turned out that somebody else had done it. And it was clear that the police had from the start been focusing on a particular suspect and doing everything in their power to find the evidence which nailed that person and ignoring and suppressing the other evidence. This led to some big scandals, and the Minister of Justice said that though our system was absolutely perfect and there was nothing wrong with it, and these two cases were incidental, still he was forced to set up a special committee to see if perhaps there might be some more of such things. This committee has got no legal status whatsoever. It could investigate some cases and make a report, but nobody had to do anything with it. And the media around this time, and this is 5 years later, started getting interested again. They were very interested at the beginning. They created The Witch. They created The Witch to sell newspapers, of course. We love to read it. Now they were interested because we had this innocent woman rotting away in jail and the bad system which had put her there. So again, it was interesting for the journalists. Okay, so this judicial committee studied the case for a year and a half, which always amazed me. I mean, if you would read Jackson's book, it seems to me that an intelligent person gets acquainted with some of the true facts of the case, I mean, the indisputable facts of the case, will very quickly get a feeling that it's all very fishy. You read the book of Jackson, you find out if he's a reliable person or not, lots of things you can check. Like in a day or two, you can be convinced that there's something terribly bad, stinking here. But this committee of top legal minds took a year and a half, and reported that indeed this was a case again where people had focused right from the start on a particular suspect and not thought of any other scenarios. For instance, the scenario that there had been no murders. They were convinced from the start they had a killer, and then they had to find the person she had killed, and then they could send her to jail, kind of the wrong way around. The scientific experts who gave evidence in court, independent scientific experts, were actually chosen initially from a small circle of friends of those important person I told you about at the beginning. Later they advised the police in their investigation, and later they advised the courts as independent scientific witnesses. That's also a bit fishy. This committee discovered that experts didn't agree about baby Amber's death, and they recommended that the case should be reopened. But, so it was sort of passed on to the Advocate General of the Supreme Court, and this is where I have to tell you some interesting things about the Dutch legal system. You can reopen a closed case if there is a new fact. Over the years, who says what is a new fact? The Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has, over the years, narrowed the notion of a new fact more and more down, because they don't like reopening closed cases, because cases should be closed, and so on and so forth. So, for instance, a new fact has to be really new, hard evidence, like somebody saw somebody else killing Amber. But if a scientist has a different opinion about existing forensic evidence, that is a new opinion. That is not a new fact. So all the scientists in the world could agree that baby Amber died a natural death, but that is a new opinion. It is not a new fact. So there is no way you can reopen the case. Because the Dutch judges are right at the top, and they're independent, of course, and they have got the freedom to choose the experts they want, to choose to believe the experts they want, to tell the experts who they want, whose advice they want. They can tell those experts what they want to tell them. And they communicate to the experts by asking questions. The experts give answers. and that expert and that editor, and then they choose which experts' opinions they like, and they put them together. So, however, in the meantime, a lot had been going on, like on the street, as I'll tell you in a moment, briefly. And for some reason, the Advocate General to the Supreme Court, who's kind of the front door, sort of the guy who receives the letter and decides whether or not to send it in, he could see that there was no new facts in what I've just told you. However, he did actually charge a multidisciplinary medical investigation into the death of that first baby, where for the first time, many different medical experts of different disciplines could actually communicate to one another and had access to all the dossiers, all the information of the case, all of it, all that they wanted. At this point, Lucia was allowed out of jail, and this is extraordinary because this can sort of never happen. I mean, her legal situation is that she's in jail for life for murder. Anyway, this Advocate General got this investigation done. It gave actually very favorable for Lucia results, namely Amber's death could just as well have been a natural death. He proposes the case to be reopened, and this was the new fact which he gave to the Supreme Court. He managed to get the expert of the original trial who had said Amber had died of digoxin. He got that expert to agree with the new experts. Otherwise, it would not have been a new fact. If your conviction, if you send somebody to jail for life on the basis of opinion of one scientist, and that scientist says they changed their mind, then it's a bit shaky. And that was actually a new fact, which the Supreme Court had opened recently in order to allow another case to be reopened, where it was absolutely clear that it had to be done. And it was actually a novelty of them to have come up with the idea that an original expert changing his mind is not a new opinion, it is a new fact. So some originality and creativity going on there. Well, yes, I rush on. How many more minutes? 7, 5? Oh, okay. These slides are all on internet, so you can read them at your leisure in 2 minutes, 5 minutes. The case has now been reopened. Lucia is out of jail. This means you go right back to the beginning. It seems like the prosecution has learned nothing, because the public prosecution has charged an independent forensic science company to sketch an outline of some work which they might do, and this company, who likes to please the public prosecution, produced an enormous fat document saying all the kind of forensic researches which they would like to do in order to prove that Lucia did kill all these people. Of course, they didn't actually write that, but that was the point of it, of course. The judges actually should have said, sorry, there's nothing, everybody go home, it's finished. But actually they decided to follow this line of actually trying to find out the truth in a couple more of the cases, which is probably in the long run going to be a good thing. Some more remarks there. Okay. Okay, now I've got sort of 4 minutes and I want to say quite a lot of things, so I'll try to say the most important things I want to say. Statistics was very important in the beginning, but later the judges had said no statistical probability calculation was used. All the deaths and incidents were shown by incontrovertible scientific or medical evidence to be unnatural deaths. And yet actually from the beginning, when that book came out, it was actually statisticians who were kind of the first people who started moving things to force that case to be reopened. That sort of kind of like a parallel, a big public debate went on. And what was very important was actually to get the media to change sides. And this slowly worked. And there were all kinds of things happening. A very important thing which happened was, well, it was very important actually to make news, because journalists can only write articles when there's news. And if nothing happens, there's no news. But I knew a science journalist who wrote a nice article in Nature about this case. and actually did a very good job, I think, understanding the arguments and giving them fairly. And then the Dutch journalists saw that there had been an article in Nature about our case. This was news. Then it came on TV and so on. The legal establishment got very angry. People like me were accused of undermining the establishment, the foundations of our society by leading people not to trust the rule of law anymore. The medical establishment has never said a word. Politicians never got involved. But slowly, public opinion, academic opinion and public opinion was won for Lucia. And at some point, key figures in the legal establishment were won for Lucia, because the beautiful thing, even about Dutch society, is that there is an overlap between the legal community and scientific community. There are people in the legal community who are also professors at universities and who are important in the legal community because they are professors at universities, and at their universities they're important because they're also important legal people, but they have to keep in good friends with their academic friends, and their academic friends can actually talk to them, and they are actually open to hear about facts. And that was a very important thing. Right, there's a petition, which we published. A Nobel Prize winner signed a petition. That was news. Then they started to get worried. Then we were attacked very bitterly. Okay, we were on some cartoons. A little bit about the statistics. Actually, I don't want to say too much about that now at all. I'll just say a little bit about the legal concept of irrefutable medical scientific proof of unnatural death. So there were all these deaths where, like, Lucia had been around, perhaps, and actually, when you die in a hospital and you've got a serious illness, right, your heart stops beating, so you're dead. But what is the cause of death? It's often very complex. It's very easy it's often sort of unknown, because it's so complex. You cannot say it was this, of course. I mean, you had some birth defects, and eventually everything went wrong, and eventually you died, but it's not sort of clear. And moreover, the precise moment you die is absolutely unpredictable. Absolutely unpredictable. Like, it could be today, it could be tomorrow, it might be next week. I mean, it might be now, it might be next week in these cases. So the deaths were unpredictable, and they did not have an easy explanation, so they were inexplicable, and then in legal jargon they could become suspicious if Lucia was there, and then they were unnatural, of course, if they were suspicious. And actually, for every single of all those babies and old people who Lucia was thought to have killed, every case separately, a majority of the medical experts consulted by the judges thought that the death was natural. But they could always find one who did think it was unnatural. Actually, in 2 cases, only one person thought the death was unnatural. And why? Because Lucia was there. Otherwise, he would have thought it was a natural death. So, what has happened there? That's the medical expert using his common sense statistical intuition, and it has become incontrovertible medical proof that this is an unnatural death. It gets worse, but I don't have much more time now. All right. Yeah, I'll wrap up. I'll just tell you it's one of the things which really makes me really upset. Lucia cannot explain her presence at all those deaths. The statistician had said, of course, a correlation is not a causality. It could be caused because Lucia is just a bad nurse. Or it could be caused because Lucia just happened to get more difficult shifts than her colleagues. Clever judges asked Lucia, were you a bad nurse? No, Your Honour. My colleagues and superiors thought I was a good nurse. I don't suppose she knew why she was being asked this question. In this case, her answer was thought to be that she was telling the truth, because they used it against her. She could not explain why she was there at those deaths, so this was part of the argument. Right, wrap up. There's some more things. Okay, lots of interesting things I could tell you about statistics, but I'm not going to do that. This is from I'm falling in for Peter Grunwald, and this is another talk, this bit. Don't want to talk about this. Oops. Oh, no. Oops. Oops. Yeah, I'm nearly at the end, really. Okay. I have a couple of final slides here. Basically, this is a case where somebody sees something unusual, but nobody has studied what is usual. Nobody knows what is usual in hospitals. Nobody has researched clusters of events in hospitals in a normal way of things. It turned out that there were 9 deaths in Lucia in the last year, then there had been none, and then the year before there had been a whole lot, but Lucia wasn't there. The ward technically had a different name then, so the hospital director could say that it had never ever been that there were so many deaths in this ward. There were, if you took account of the fact that it had a different name before. After 2001, there were 2 quiet years, and then there was another burst of deaths, but I didn't hear of any murder investigations. So there appears to be a phenomenon of clustering of events, and as a statistician, I can have got plenty of hypotheses why that should be, normal explanations, and nobody has studied these. You cannot do any statistics in this case, in a special case, if you don't understand the usual situation. We just don't know if this was unusual or not. Okay, I said this. Okay, I don't want to say that. Yes, I think this is the end, so I will stop there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there people with questions? I'm quite sure we would have liked to see a bit more of the statistics, but...
Yeah. Well, they're on the slides are on my homepage.
Okay, good, yeah.
You can just email me and I'll answer any questions.
Do we have a question? Yes, there.
Have you looked into any other cases that look like this? I know there was one in the UK about 10 years ago that had to do with a mother that was convicted for the murder of her 2 young children, and it turned out they were both SIDS. Right.
Yes, it's very similar in the respect that in the Sally Clark case, there was a coincidence of a number of her babies having died and not being clear why, and a pillar of the medical establishment quoted some statistics incorrectly with the wrong argument, and the judges thought it was all very clear, and the statisticians said, please may we present the counter-arguments to the jury, which is important in prison, and the judge said, no, this is not rocket science, you don't need to come here. And so Sally Clark went to jail and died after she came out, a broken woman, and the medical guy was scratched off the list, but later put back again because, of course, his stupidity in this case didn't mean that he was bad for his patients. So Sir so-and-so is still making lots of money doing his work.
We have one more question. Yeah.
Yes, there was a small part in the story I didn't fully understand. You said that Lucia was not able to explain her presence.
No.
If I go to work and crimes are committed at my work, I think it's quite easy to explain my presence. I work there.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, don't blame me. Yes. The point is that becomes... Yeah, well, maybe I can explain the point a bit more. The judge does not use a probability calculation, a statistical probability calculation anymore. But he does listen to medical people who say, it's so unusual there being so many deaths in a short time. And anybody can see that it's so unusual that they all occur in Lucia's shifts. You don't even have to have a statistician compute a probability to see that. Actually, one of the reasons the coincidence is so striking is because events have been moved from the shift before or the shift after. Some have been forgotten, so on and so on. But anyway, the judges have taken the verbal statistical argument of the statistician and they reproduce it as kind of illustrates, because the statisticians has said correlation is not causality. We must rule out alternative causes. He gave a list of 4 by way of example. Nobody else had done that, so the judges only had to tick off those 4. And they did it by asking Lucia, were you a bad nurse? Did you have more difficult shifts? something else, something else. No, Your Honor, no, Your Honor. And so she hung herself, you could say, on the statistician's argument, which had become a common sense and medical argument. And yeah, so statisticians were out of the game because they were troublesome. I mean, people did, yeah.
Do give us the URL to your slides.
Sorry?
Do give us the URL to your slides.
Do I what?
Your slides,
yes,
presentation. Where can we find them?
Where can I find them? Yes, you can find them on my home page. And you can find them on my home page if you can find my home page, which I just, there. So I think if you do ~Gill / Lucia with a capital L .pdf, you will get a PDF of these slides. But if you can find that page, sorry, you will, well, you can just do Richard Gill, Google Richard Gill.
Okay.
You will find
Thank you very much. You should have had more time. Yeah. Very interesting.
Thank you very much. Okay.